My brother slapped my daughter in front of everyone and said, like mother, like daughter, both useless. He laughed, and my dad smirked, adding she needed to be taught some shame. They had no idea the microphone was on, and what I did next turned his whole life into absolute hell. Have you ever witnessed something so utterly shocking, so profoundly cruel, that it shatters your entire worldview in a single, agonizing moment? Something that comes from the very people who are supposed to love and protect you? For me, that moment arrived when my brother, Mark, publicly slapped my 6-year-old daughter, Chloe, right in front of our entire family. But the real gut punch? Hearing my father, Richard, smirk and say, well, she needed to learn some shame. And then, the tinkling sound of my mother, Carol, laughing along. They thought they were safe in their cruelty, but they forgot about the little documentary microphone that was recording every single, damning word. Before I tell you exactly how I took that recording and systematically turned my brother's carefully curated life into an absolute living hell, hit that subscribe button if you believe children deserve protection, even from their own family. Growing up in the Thompson household felt like living under a microscope, constantly scrutinized, always found wanting. From the earliest age, I understood my place, the designated scapegoat. I was the one who could never quite measure up, the one who invited disappointment, while Mark, my older brother, was the golden child, a shining example of perfection in our father's eyes. Our family dynamic, a suffocating blend of favoritism and subtle cruelty, was etched into my very being long before I had the language to even understand it. My father, Richard, a formidable corporate attorney, cast a long shadow with his exacting expectations. Mark, athletic, academically brilliant, and, most crucially, willing to mirror Richard's aggressive, uncompromising personality, met them all flawlessly. I, on the other hand, might have inherited my mother Carol's appearance, but certainly not her compliant nature. Where she was content to enforce Richard's rigid rules and uphold the family hierarchy, I questioned everything. That made me the family troublemaker. Sarah just doesn't understand how to behave properly, Carol would sigh dramatically to relatives at family gatherings, shaking her head with a practiced, weary disappointment. Not like our Mark. By 16, I developed a thick, protective shell. My survival strategy was simple: make myself invisible, keep my head down, and count the agonizing days until I could finally escape. College felt like salvation. That's where I met Michael. He was kind, attentive, and, most importantly, he saw me. Truly saw me, in a way my family never had. We married when I was 20, far too young perhaps, but I was desperate to build a family of my own, one based on love and acceptance, not judgment. My parents attended our modest wedding with tight smiles and a steady stream of thinly veiled criticisms about everything from my dress to our budget. Mark, already scaling the corporate ladder at 22, presented an expensive gift and a speech that sounded supportive, but was laced with his signature condescension. I never thought my little sister would find someone willing to take her on, he joked to uncomfortable laughter. Good luck, Michael. You'll need it. The sting of his words lingered. For a while, I honestly believed I had escaped. Michael and I built a life in a small apartment. I finished my communications degree, working part-time to make ends meet. We weren't wealthy, not by a long shot, but we were genuinely happy. When I became pregnant with Chloe at 24, it felt like every piece of my life was finally, beautifully, falling into place. Chloe arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning, a perfect 7 pounds, 3 ounces of pure, unadulterated joy. She had Michael's bright blue eyes and my dark hair. Holding her, I made a silent, sacred promise. She would always know she was loved, exactly as she was. She would never, ever question her worth, the way I had been forced to question mine. But then, the first cracks appeared in my seemingly perfect new life. Chloe was 3. Michael started working late, becoming distant, emotionally withdrawn. Then came the devastating discovery: text messages from someone named Jessica on his phone. When I confronted him, he denied it, then admitted to a 6-month affair with a coworker. We tried counseling, but his heart just wasn't in it. By the time Chloe turned 4, we were divorced. I didn't tell my family the messy truth about the affair. I simply said we'd grown apart, knowing instinctively they would somehow twist Michael's infidelity into my failure. My mother, Carol, still managed to do exactly that. "Men don't leave happy homes, Sarah," she'd said over the phone, her voice dripping with implication. "What did you do to push him away?" Single motherhood brought financial challenges I hadn't even begun to anticipate. My administrative assistant job at Madison Marketing barely covered our rent and childcare. Occasionally, I had to swallow my pride and ask my parents for help with unexpected expenses: a car repair, a medical bill, new school supplies for Chloe. Each time, the money arrived with a heavy lecture about responsibility, poor life choices, and my general inability to manage my affairs. Meanwhile, Mark's life, from the outside, gleamed with perfection. He'd become the youngest vice president at his financial firm. He married Rachel, a pediatrician from a wealthy family, and they lived in a sprawling, meticulously maintained house in the suburbs. "We're focusing on our careers first," Mark would explain, implying a sophisticated, strategic path. My parents, of course, held them up as the aspirational example I should have followed. "If only you had applied yourself like your brother, Sarah," Richard would intone whenever I visited, his gaze sweeping over my modest appearance. "You could have had something to show for yourself." Despite everything, I desperately wanted Chloe to have a connection with her grandparents, with her uncle. Children deserve family connections, I told myself, even if it meant I had to act as a permanent buffer between their innocent world and the toxicity I knew so well. So, when the annual family reunion at my parents' lake house approached this summer, I decided, against my better judgment, to attend for the first time in 3 years. "You sure about this?" my friend Emily asked, her voice laced with concern. "These people have never had your back." "They're still family," I replied, though my stomach clenched with unease. "And Chloe loves the lake. I can handle a weekend for her sake." Chloe was ecstatic about the trip. At 6, she was a bundle of boundless energy and uninhibited curiosity, with a passion for singing that filled our small apartment at all hours. She had my stubbornness, but a confidence I envied, unafraid to take up space in a way I'd never been allowed to be. "Will Uncle Mark be there, and Grandma and Grandpa?" she chirped as we packed. "And can I swim in the lake every day?" "Yes to all of it," I promised, pushing down the familiar wave of apprehension. "And Grandma said your cousins are coming, too." What I conveniently left out was that my brother-in-law, David, married to my father's sister, Susan, would be recording the entire reunion for a family documentary. My father had been insistent about documenting the Thompson family legacy, particularly Mark's stellar achievements. As we drove toward the lake house, I rehearsed calming mantras in my head. "It's just 3 days. I can handle anything for 3 days. I'm not that scared little girl anymore. I'll protect Chloe from experiencing what I did." Looking back, I realize I was trying to convince myself of something impossible. You can't protect someone from toxic dynamics while simultaneously placing them directly in harm's way. Some lessons I learned are taught the hardest way possible. The Thompson family lake house stood like a monument to old money and pretension, its weathered cedar exterior and sprawling deck overlooking Lake Michigan. As I pulled our modest sedan into the circular driveway, parking behind Mark's gleaming BMW and my parents' Mercedes, I felt that familiar, stomach-lurching shrinking sensation I always experienced around my family. "We're here," Chloe exclaimed, unbuckling her seat belt before I'd even fully parked. Her excitement was palpable, innocent of the heavy undercurrents that immediately tensed my shoulders. "Can I go see the lake right away?" "Let's get settled first," I said, forcing a smile, "and say hello to everyone." The front door swung open as we approached, revealing my mother, Carol, in pressed linen pants and a cashmere sweater, despite the summer heat. Her highlighted hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. "There you are," she said, her eyes scanning me critically before settling on Chloe with a manufactured warmth. "We were beginning to think you'd changed your mind." Traffic was heavy, I explained, accepting her stiff, perfunctory hug. "It's good to see you, Mom." Inside, the great room buzzed with relatives arranging food and drinks. My father, Richard, stood by the stone fireplace, deep in conversation with my Uncle Tom, glancing up to offer a curt nod of acknowledgement without pausing his discussion about stock options. Mark and Rachel emerged from the kitchen, his arm draped possessively around her shoulders. My brother had Richard's imposing build, tall and broad-shouldered, but his features were sharper, more calculated. His smile never quite reached his eyes. Well, the prodigal sister returns," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, and with little Miss Chloe. "You've grown since I last saw you, kiddo." Chloe, suddenly shy, pressed herself against my leg. "Hello, Uncle Mark." Rachel stepped forward with a genuine smile, a stark contrast to the rest of the family. She had always been kind to me, though in the carefully distant way of someone who recognized the family dynamic but wouldn't dare challenge it. "It's lovely to see you both," she said, embracing me warmly. "Chloe, your cousins are down by the dock if you want to join them after you get settled." "Mom, can I go?" Chloe asked, already bouncing with anticipation. "After we take our bags to our room," I promised. Mark sipped his bourbon, eyeing me over the rim of his glass. "Still working at that little marketing place?" "What is it?" "Assistant to someone important." "Administrative assistant," I corrected, my voice steady despite the rising irritation. "And yes, still there. I got a small promotion last month, actually." "How nice for you," he replied with manufactured enthusiasm, then, without missing a beat, turned to his father. "I just closed a 7-figure deal with Anderson Tech, Dad. Did I mention the bonus they're giving me?" And just like that, the attention shifted away as my father clapped Mark on the shoulder. "That's my boy. Always aiming higher." My brother-in-law, David, was setting up his camera equipment near the large bay windows. He gave me a sympathetic nod as I passed. David had married into the family but never fully adopted their values, making him something of an outsider, much like me. "Planning to get everyone's good side?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Your dad wants a lot of footage of Mark talking about his career achievements," he replied quietly. "I've got wireless mics set up around the main areas to capture natural conversations, too." Our assigned bedroom was the smallest in the house, tucked into a far corner with a view of the neighboring property rather than the coveted lake. I helped Chloe unpack, listening to her cheerful chatter about seeing her cousins, Mark's nieces and nephews from Rachel's side of the family. "Can I wear my blue swimsuit? And can I show everyone my new song? I practiced all week." My heart tightened. Chloe's uninhibited enthusiasm was exactly what had been crushed out of me at her age. "Of course, you can sing, honey. Just remember that sometimes adults are talking, so find a good moment, okay?" The first evening proceeded with the expected undercurrent of competition and comparison. Richard dominated dinner conversation with questions about Mark's latest achievements, while Carol commented on everything from my hair. "Don't you think it's time for a more professional cut?" To my parenting, Chloe seems very energetic. "Don't you think some structure would be good for her?" I noticed how Chloe's cousins, aged 7 to 12, already mirrored the family hierarchy. They corrected her pronunciation, rolled their eyes when she spoke too loudly, and excluded her from their games with a practiced politeness that adults might not notice, but children certainly feel. After dinner, while helping with dishes, my Aunt Susan approached me. "Sarah," she said, her voice laced with false sympathy. "Mark mentioned you've been struggling since the divorce. We have a position opening in our company's mailroom if you're interested." "I appreciate that," I said carefully, forcing a tight smile. "But I'm actually up for another promotion at Madison. I'm heading a small project team now." She patted my arm with a look of patronizing disbelief. "Well, the offer stands. Sometimes we need to be realistic about our capabilities." Later, as I tucked Chloe into bed, I found her unusually quiet. "Everything okay, sweetie?" She traced patterns on the quilt. "Cousin Sophie said my singing was annoying, and Uncle Mark told me girls shouldn't be so loud if they want people to like them." I swallowed hard, a familiar, sickening wave washing over me. The old patterns, repeating themselves in a new generation. "Chloe, listen to me. Your voice is beautiful, and you have every right to be heard. Some people just don't know how to appreciate enthusiasm. Grandpa said you were too loud as a kid, too, and that's why you always got in trouble." I forced myself to breathe through the surge of anger. Well, sometimes adults are wrong, even grandparents. Especially your mom's parents. She giggled at that, and I kissed her forehead. Tomorrow will be better. We'll go swimming and have fun, just us. But as I lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the muffled laughter of my parents and brother still drinking downstairs, I couldn't shake the chilling feeling that I had made a terrible, irreversible mistake bringing Chloe here. Some environments, I realized, are toxic no matter how much time has passed, and the Thompson family lake house was proving to be exactly that. Morning arrived with brilliant sunshine streaming through the thin curtains of our room. Chloe woke with her usual boundless enthusiasm, the previous day's hurts apparently forgotten in the promise of lake swimming and breakfast waffles. "Mom, wake up." Uncle David said they're making a special breakfast in the big room. She bounced on the edge of my bed, already dressed in her favorite blue sundress with yellow butterflies. I checked my phone, 8:17 a.m. I'd hoped to sleep longer after a restless night, but Chloe's excitement was contagious. Okay, I'm up." I laughed, pulling her into a hug. "Let me get dressed and we'll go down together." The big room was what my parents pretentiously called the Great Hall, a cavernous space with vaulted ceilings and a wall of windows overlooking the lake. It doubled as a dining room and gathering space, with excellent acoustics that amplified every sound. By the time Chloe and I arrived, most of the family was already assembled. My father, Richard, presided at the head of the massive oak table, newspaper in hand. My mother, Carol, supervised the catering staff they'd hired for the weekend. Heaven forbid, she actually cooked for her family. Mark and Rachel sat with Richard, engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation about property investments. "Good morning," I offered to the room generally, receiving only distracted nods in return. "Sarah, coffee's on the sideboard," Carol said, waving a dismissive hand. "Chloe, the children are eating at the small table by the window." I noticed David adjusting microphones discreetly around the room, preparing for another day of documentary filming. He gave me a small wave as I poured coffee. "Getting all the family drama on tape?" I asked quietly, a bitter edge to my voice. "Your dad wants authentic family interactions," he replied with a meaningful look. "For posterity." The breakfast proceeded without incident at first. Chloe joined her cousins, trying valiantly to enter their conversations while being subtly but effectively excluded. I sat with my Aunt Susan and her husband, making polite small talk about the weather and local property values. About 30 minutes in, the children finished eating and migrated to the play area at the far end of the Great Hall. The adults remained at the table, conversation growing louder as mimosas were refilled. I kept one eye on Chloe, who had taken to singing softly to herself while coloring in a book I'd packed. Gradually, her singing grew more confident. It was a song from her favorite cartoon, something about friendship and adventures. Her sweet voice carried in the acoustically designed room, occasionally rising above the adult conversation. I noticed Mark's jaw tightening each time Chloe hit a high note. He shot several pointed looks in my direction, which I pointedly pretended not to see. My nieces and nephews had abandoned Chloe to play a board game, excluding her with practiced casualness. "Sarah," my mother called from across the table, her voice laced with annoyance. "Don't you think Chloe is being a bit disruptive?" Before I could answer, Chloe's voice soared into the chorus of her song, completely unaware of the tension her joyful noise was creating. "For God's sake," Mark muttered, loud enough for nearby conversations to pause. "Can't you control your child for 5 minutes?" I began to stand, intending to quietly ask Chloe to lower her volume, when everything happened at once. Mark pushed back from the table abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. He strode toward the children's area with a chilling purpose. I moved to intercept him, but my Aunt Susan asked me a question that delayed me for mere seconds. Seconds that changed everything. Mark reached Chloe, who looked up at her uncle with an innocent smile that quickly transformed into shock as his hand connected with her cheek in a sharp, brutal slap that echoed through the suddenly silent room. Time seemed to freeze. Chloe's small body rocked backward from the force. Her coloring book fell to the floor. The red imprint of Mark's hand bloomed instantly on her pale cheek. Like mother, like daughter, Both are useless, Mark said, his voice loud and chillingly clear, looking around the room as if expecting applause. Can't even behave properly in public. My father's voice cut through my stunned paralysis. Well, she needed to learn some shame, Richard said, a cold smirk playing on his lips. And then, my mother's brittle, tinkling laugh. Sarah never did understand the value of a quiet presence. I finally unfroze, rushing to Chloe, who had begun to sob, her small body shaking with shock, pain, and utter humiliation. As I gathered her into my arms, the enormity of what had just happened crashed over me. "What is wrong with you?" I hissed at Mark, who stood watching with his arms crossed, a defiant sneer on his face. "She's 6 years old. She's old enough to learn that the world doesn't revolve around her noise," he replied coldly, his eyes glinting. "Maybe if someone had taught you that lesson, you wouldn't be a divorced secretary raising a brat alone." "Administrative assistant," I corrected automatically, my voice shaking with raw rage and disbelief. "And she's not a brat. She's a child who is singing." My father precisely folded his newspaper. "Sarah, you're overreacting as usual. A little discipline never hurt anyone. Look how well Mark turned out, compared to how you coddled that girl." The room had divided into distinct camps, those openly agreeing with Mark, those uncomfortable but silent, and David, who I suddenly noticed was standing very still by his equipment, his face pale. The microphone. The documentary microphones were on, recording everything. Through my fury and my daughter's heart-wrenching tears, I realized we had irrefutable evidence of what had just happened. Mark must have realized it, too, because his eyes darted to David and the recording equipment, a flicker of panic in their depths. "You know what?" I said, standing with Chloe in my arms, her face buried against my shoulder. My voice was surprisingly steady, ringing with cold finality. "We're done here. Nobody touches my daughter. Nobody." "Oh, stop with the dramatics," my mother said dismissively. It was hardly a tap. "You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself?" I laughed, a bitter, incredulous sound. My brother just assaulted a 6-year-old for singing, and I'm the embarrassment? Mark stepped toward me menacingly. "Watch your mouth, Sarah." It was discipline, not assault. Something you clearly know nothing about. I backed away, holding Chloe tighter. "Stay away from us. We're leaving." "Running away again?" Mark called after me as I headed for the stairs, his voice dripping with scorn. "That's all you've ever been good at." I didn't respond, focusing instead on getting Chloe somewhere safe. As we reached our room, I could hear the murmur of conversation resuming below. My family already moving on, dismissing what they considered a minor incident rather than the unforgivable act it was. What they didn't know is that everything had changed. The rules of engagement had shifted permanently. My brother had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And thanks to my father's obsession with documenting the family legacy, I had proof. In our small bedroom, I gently placed Chloe on the bed. Her crying had subsided to hiccuping sobs, but the angry red handprint on her cheek remained vivid against her pale skin. I took a washcloth from the bathroom, ran it under cold water, and carefully pressed it to her face. "It hurts, Mommy," she whimpered, her voice tiny and broken. "Why did Uncle Mark hit me? Was I bad?" The question shattered something inside me, twisting my gut with a pain so profound it almost buckled my knees. "No, baby, you are not bad. Not at all. Uncle Mark was wrong to hit you. Very, very wrong." "But Grandpa said." "Grandpa was wrong, too," I said firmly, gathering her close. "Nobody should ever hit you, especially not for singing. Your voice is beautiful." As Chloe gradually calmed, I began packing our bags with shaking hands. We needed to leave immediately. I had no doubt that if we stayed, my family would gaslight us both, minimizing what happened until Chloe herself began to question her memories and her feelings. A soft knock at the door made me tense, every nerve on edge. "Who is it?" I called, positioning myself protectively between the door and Chloe. "It's David," came the quiet reply. "Can I talk to you for a minute alone?" I hesitated, then opened the door slightly, just a crack. "Now isn't a good time." David's face was drawn with concern. "I know. Listen, I got everything on tape." The slap, what Mark said, your dad's comments, all of it. He lowered his voice further, leaning in. I can make you a copy before they realize and make me delete it. A cold, steely clarity washed over me. You do that, I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet firm. He nodded. What Mark did was assault, plain and simple. And the others. He shook his head in disgust, a profound disappointment in his eyes. I married into this family, but I've never seen anything like that. Susan doesn't know I'm talking to you. Thank you, I whispered, relief and resolve intertwining. We're leaving as soon as I finish packing. Meet me by my car in 20 minutes, he said. I'll download a copy of the audio to a USB drive for you. After he left, I called Emily. She answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful. How's the family reunion from hell? Mark hit Chloe, I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts. Slapped her across the face for singing too loudly. And my parents laughed. He what? Emily's outrage exploded through the phone. Tell me you're leaving right now. Packing as we speak, I replied, a tear finally escaping. Come straight to my house, she insisted. Don't go home in case they try to follow you. By the time I ended the call, Chloe had fallen asleep, utterly exhausted from crying. I finished packing quickly, then gently woke her. We're going to visit Aunt Emily, I explained, using her honorary title. We need to leave quietly. Okay, she nodded, still subdued in a way that truly broke my heart. As we made our way downstairs with our bags, my mother intercepted us in the foyer. Where do you think you're going? She demanded, her voice sharp. Home, I replied flatly, my gaze unwavering. Or did you think we'd stay after Mark assaulted my daughter? Don't be ridiculous, she huffed, her face contorted with exasperation. It was hardly a tap. You're overreacting as usual. A tap doesn't leave a handprint, I said, shifting so she could clearly see Chloe's face, where the mark was still visible despite the cold compress. For a fleeting moment, something like doubt flickered in Carol's eyes, but she quickly recovered, her jaw tightening. Children bruise easily. You're making a scene over nothing. Nothing. I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Would it be nothing if someone slapped you for talking during breakfast? Or if I slapped Mark for being condescending? That's different, she insisted, indignant. Adults don't need discipline. Neither do children, I countered, my voice gaining strength. They need guidance and respect, not violence. My father appeared behind her, his face thunderous. Sarah, you're being hysterical. Sit down, have a drink, and we can discuss this rationally. There's nothing to discuss, I said, moving decisively toward the door. We're leaving. If you walk out that door, Richard warned, his voice low and menacing, don't expect any more financial help. No more bailing you out when you can't make rent. The threat hung in the air, a stark reminder of my precarious financial situation and my occasional dependence on their assistance. In the past, it might have worked. Not today. Keep your money, I said calmly, meeting his gaze. It's not worth this. As I guided Chloe toward the door, Mark appeared from the living room, a tumbler of whiskey in hand, despite the early hour. Running away as usual, little sister? Can't face the consequences of your poor parenting. I stopped, turning to look him directly in the eyes. The only consequence I'm avoiding is allowing my daughter to think it's normal for men to hit children. My voice was cold, unwavering. Enjoy your perfect life, Mark. I hope it was worth showing everyone who you really are. His face darkened, a flash of something ugly in his eyes. Is that a threat? No, I replied, opening the front door, the sunlight blinding after the dim interior. Just an observation. As promised, David was waiting beside his car in the side driveway, partially hidden from the house by a stand of pines. He pressed a small USB drive into my hand. The audio is clear as day, he said quietly, his eyes full of sympathy. Mark slap, his comment about you both being useless. Your dad saying she needed to learn shame. Your mom laughing. It's all there. I'd be careful how you use it, though. They'll know it came from me. Thank you, I whispered, my heart aching with gratitude. I won't implicate you unless I absolutely have to. The drive to Emily's apartment was silent, Chloe dozing in her booster seat while I processed what had happened and what I needed to do next. By the time we arrived, a cold, precise plan was forming in my mind. Emily met us at the door, enveloping first Chloe, then me, in fierce, comforting hugs. "I made up the guest room for you both," she said, her voice warm and steady. "Stay as long as you need." That evening, after Chloe was finally asleep in the unfamiliar bed, Emily and I sat at her kitchen table with the USB drive and her laptop. "Are you sure you want to hear this again?" she asked, her gaze gentle, as I inserted the drive. "I need to know exactly what was said," I replied, my voice hard with determination. "And I need a witness who isn't family." The recording was worse than I remembered. The casual cruelty in Mark's voice as he called us useless. The satisfied smirk audible in my father's comment about shame. My mother's brittle, tinkling laugh. All of it painted a picture of people who saw nothing wrong with hitting a child. "Jesus," Emily whispered when it finished playing, her face pale. "I knew your family was toxic, but this—" "I know," I said, my resolve hardening into steel. "The question is, what do I do about it?" "You could go to the police," she suggested. "That's assault on a minor, plain and simple." I agreed. "But you know how these things work. It would be my word against theirs without this recording, which might not even be admissible. And they'd paint me as the unstable single mother trying to extort money from successful relatives. So what then? Let them get away with it." I shook my head slowly, a cold, fierce light in my eyes. "No. Mark crossed a line today, and there have to be consequences. Real ones." Over the next few days, while Chloe and I adjusted to our temporary life at Emily's, I began researching. First, I took Chloe to her pediatrician, Dr. Hayes, who documented the fading bruise and referred us to a child psychologist. "She's experiencing some trauma responses," Dr. Hayes explained gently. "Nightmares, clinginess, fear of male authority figures. The psychologist will help her process what happened." Next, I consulted Rebecca, a lawyer friend from college, bringing the audio recording with me. "This is pretty damning," she said after listening intently. "In terms of criminal charges, it could go either way. A good lawyer would argue it was a one-time disciplinary action, not abuse. But civil action? That's another story." "I'm not interested in suing my brother for money," I clarified. "I understand," Rebecca nodded. "But you should know your options. And you should know that this recording would be extremely damaging to someone with a public reputation to protect." That comment sparked an idea, a cold, calculated flicker of vengeance. Mark's position at Meridian Financial came with a strict morality clause, something he had often bragged about at family gatherings, explaining how executives were held to high ethical standards because they handled sensitive client information. "What if the goal isn't a lawsuit?" I asked lowly, my voice tight with purpose. "What if it's accountability?" That night, I began researching Mark's professional life more thoroughly. His company bio touted his community involvement, including serving on the board of a children's charity and mentoring youth in business programs. The irony was almost too perfect, too sickeningly hypocritical. I created a detailed plan, weighing each potential action against both its effectiveness and its consequences for Chloe. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. This was about protection. This was about justice. It was about ensuring Mark understood that actions have consequences, especially when those actions hurt a child. The decisive moment came 3 days after we'd left the lake house, when Chloe woke screaming from a nightmare. "Uncle Mark was chasing me." She sobbed into my shoulder. "He wanted to hit me again because I was singing." As I held my daughter, soothing her back to sleep with promises of safety, my decision crystallized. Mark had robbed Chloe of her sense of security, of her joy in singing, the very thing that brought her such happiness. He had made her feel ashamed of her voice, just as my parents had done to me throughout my childhood. The cycle needed to end, not just for Chloe, but for any other child who might experience Mark's discipline in the future. The next morning, I set my plan in motion. My plan began with documentation. I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Evelyn Reed, the child psychologist Dr. Hayes had recommended. She specialized in childhood trauma and had experience testifying in abuse cases. "Chloe is showing classic signs of an acute stress response," Dr. Reed explained after their initial session. She's experiencing anxiety around male authority figures, sleep disturbances, and a reluctance to engage in activities she previously enjoyed, particularly singing. Will she be okay? I asked, the weight of maternal worry pressing on my chest. Children are remarkably resilient with proper support, she assured me. But what happened to her was significant trauma, not a minor discipline incident as your family seems to believe. I'd like to see her weekly for a while. Dr. Reed provided a written assessment documenting Chloe's symptoms and their clear cause. This became the first piece of damning evidence in my growing file. Next came the police report. The officer who took my statement was compassionate but realistic. Without visible injuries or independent witnesses, this would typically be hard to pursue, Officer Jenkins explained. Family discipline falls into a gray area legally. But then she listened to the audio recording. But with the audio recording, she paused, her expression shifting. That changes things. This report establishes a formal record of the incident, which could be important later. My phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from family members. My mother's texts oscillated between guilt-tripping, "You're breaking your father's heart with this drama," and minimizing, "It was just a little slap for heaven's sake." Mark had progressed from dismissive, "Get over yourself," to threatening, "You'll regret making a big deal out of this." I responded to none of them. Instead, I created a carefully edited version of the audio recording. Not manipulated, but trimmed to include only the critical moments. Mark's slap, the sound unmistakable, his chilling, useless comment, my father's statement about Chloe needing to learn some shame, and my mother's brittle laughter. I added no commentary, letting their actions and words speak for themselves. Then I took a deep breath and sent this edited clip, along with a factual, unemotional account of what happened, to 3 strategic recipients. First, to the board of directors at Meridian Financial, where Mark served as vice president. Second, to the leadership of the Children's Future Foundation, where Mark sat on the board of directors. Third, to the organizers of the Westlake Business Leaders Mentorship Program, where Mark regularly worked with high school students. Each message was professional and restrained, explaining that I felt ethically obligated to share this information given Mark's positions of influence with children and in the community. I requested confidentiality regarding my identity as the source, citing concerns for my daughter's privacy. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked, her voice hushed, as I hovered over the send button on the final email. "There's no going back." "I'm sure," I replied, thinking of Chloe's tearful question, was I bad? No child should ever question their worth because an adult couldn't control their temper. Mark made his choice when he slapped a 6-year-old for singing. These are simply the consequences. Within hours, my phone exploded with notifications. Mark had discovered what I'd done. I suspect one of the board members contacted him immediately. His messages turned from threatening to panicked. "What have you done?" "The board called an emergency meeting. They're talking about suspending me pending investigation. You need to tell them this is a family misunderstanding right now." My parents joined the barrage. My father's messages were coldly furious. "You've betrayed this family for attention." My mother's were increasingly desperate. "Please call us. We can fix this together." I blocked them all. David called that evening, his voice hushed. "Mark is losing his mind at your parents' house. They know I recorded everything, but they don't know I gave you a copy. Mark's threatening to sue you for defamation." "Let him try," I replied calmly, a sense of quiet power settling over me. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. All I did was share his actual words and actions with people who should know about them. "Your parents are saying you're unstable, that you've always been jealous of Mark. They're trying to convince everyone this is about the divorce and money." I laughed, a humorless, bitter sound. "Of course they are. It's easier than admitting their golden child hit a kindergartner for singing too loudly." The next morning brought an unexpected call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Rachel, Mark's wife. "Sarah?" Her voice sounded strained, fragile. "Can we meet somewhere private?" We arranged to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. When Rachel arrived, I was shocked by her appearance. Always meticulously put together, she now looked exhausted, with dark circles under red-rimmed eyes. I heard the recording, she said without preamble, sliding into the booth across from me. David played it for Susan, and she called me. I waited, unsure where this conversation was heading. I need to know, she hesitated, twisting her wedding ring. Was this the first time Mark has done something like this? To Chloe? Yes, I confirmed, but his temper has always been there, just usually directed at me. She nodded slowly. He has a temper at home, too. Never physical before, but... She looked down at her coffee, her voice barely a whisper. The way he spoke to Chloe, the things he said about you both being useless. I've heard that tone before, directed at me. Something clicked into place in my understanding. My heart ached for her. Rachel, are you okay? Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know anymore. When everything started happening with his job and the charity board, he threw a glass across the kitchen. Said it was my fault for not defending him to my father, who's friends with one of the Meridian directors. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't, she said firmly, looking up, a flicker of resolve in her eyes. Mark did this. And maybe I needed to see who he really is. She straightened her shoulders, a quiet strength emerging. I told him I'm staying with my sister for a while. He needs to get help for his anger. As Rachel and I parted ways, a text came through from Samantha, my supervisor at Madison Marketing. Just got a strange call from someone named Mark Thompson asking questions about your employment. Said he was a potential reference. I didn't share any information. Is everything okay? My brother was clearly attempting damage control by digging into my life for counter-ammunition. I explained the situation briefly to Samantha, including sending her the audio clip as a precaution against any further contact from my family. Her response was immediate and incredibly supportive. That's horrific. Take whatever time you need for your daughter. Your job is secure, and if they contact anyone here again, we'll handle it appropriately. The professional consequences for Mark mounted quickly. By the end of the week, Meridian Financial had placed him on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. The children's charity removed him from their board effective immediately, citing their zero-tolerance policy regarding child welfare. The mentorship program mutually agreed to pause his involvement. Community response was equally swift once the story began circulating. Parents from Chloe's school, neighbors, and even distant acquaintances reached out with messages of support. Many shared their own stories of family abuse minimized as discipline. A small community of survivors formed around us, offering both practical help and emotional solidarity. Mark attempted to control the narrative through mutual connections, claiming I had manipulated the recording and was using Chloe as a pawn in a family disagreement about money. Few believed him once they heard the unedited audio. My phone rang again, this time David. I just wanted you to know, he said quietly, his voice weighted with significance. Several other family members have approached me privately to say they witnessed Mark being physically aggressive with his nieces and nephews before. They were too afraid of your parents' reaction to speak up, but they're supporting you now. The revelation that Mark's behavior might have affected other children in the family strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about Chloe anymore. It was about breaking a pattern of abuse disguised as discipline that had potentially harmed multiple children and would have harmed more if left unchecked. As the consequences of his actions became increasingly public, Mark's attempts to contact me grew more desperate. He vacillated between rage and manipulation, threats and pleas for family loyalty. I maintained my silence, focusing instead on Chloe's healing and our path forward. The foundation had been laid. The truth was in the open, documented, and undeniable. What happened next would depend on how Mark and my parents chose to respond to that truth, and whether they could finally acknowledge the profound harm they had caused. By the third week after the incident, the consequences of Mark's actions had rippled through both his professional and personal life. Meridian Financial's investigation concluded with his demotion from vice president to a non-client-facing role, a significant step down in both status and compensation. The children's charity had permanently removed him from their board. Most painfully for his ego, the story had circulated among his prestigious social circle, resulting in uncomfortable questions and canceled dinner invitations. I learned most of this through David, who had become an unexpected ally. Your parents are in damage control mode, he reported during one of our calls. They're telling everyone you've always been unstable and jealous of Mark's success. That's not surprising, I replied, having anticipated this reaction. They've been using that narrative my entire life. What I hadn't anticipated was the family division that emerged. My mother's sister, Catherine, called me directly, her normally reserved voice tight with emotion. I saw Mark slap your little girl, she admitted, her voice trembling. I was across the room and didn't intervene. I've been ashamed of my silence ever since. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my heart hammering. Because your parents are asking the family to present a united front against you, claiming you're exaggerating what happened, she explained, a fierce determination in her tone. I can't be part of that lie. What Mark did was wrong, and their reaction was worse. Catherine wasn't alone. Gradually, other relatives reached out, some offering support, others simply acknowledging they had witnessed the incident and confirming my account. The family was fracturing along moral lines rather than blood ties. Meanwhile, Chloe was making remarkable progress with Dr. Reed. The nightmares had decreased, though she still grew anxious around loud male voices. Most encouragingly, she had started singing again, quietly at first, then with growing confidence, as I consistently reinforced that her voice was beautiful and welcome in our home. Weeks after the incident, my grandmother Doris, my father's mother, and the formidable family matriarch summoned everyone to her home. This has gone far enough, she declared on the phone, her voice brooking no argument. I want both sides of the story, and I want the family to make peace. There aren't two sides to hitting a child, Grandma, I replied, my voice firm. Perhaps not, she conceded, surprising me with her candor. But there needs to be a resolution. Sunday at 2. I expect you to be there. I consulted with Dr. Reed about whether to bring Chloe to this family meeting. Her advice was clear. Absolutely not. This is adult business now, and she shouldn't be exposed to potential conflict or be asked to relive her trauma. Emily agreed to watch Chloe while I attended the meeting alone. As I drove to my grandmother's sprawling Victorian home, anxiety gnawed at my stomach. I hadn't seen my parents or Mark since the lake house. How would they behave now that their golden child had faced actual consequences for his actions? The tension in my grandmother's formal living room was thick enough to cut with a knife. My parents sat stiffly on the antique sofa, my mother's face a mask of composure that couldn't quite hide her fury. Mark and Rachel sat separately, she in an armchair by the window, he leaning against the mantelpiece, eyes bloodshot. Various aunts, uncles, and adult cousins filled the remaining seats, their usual boisterous chatter conspicuously absent. My grandmother entered last, leaning on her cane but radiating authority at 87. I've lived long enough to see 5 generations of this family, she began without preamble, her voice steady and commanding. And I've never been more disappointed than I am today. My father straightened, about to protest. Mother, if you'd just listen to our side, Richard. I may be old, but I'm not senile. She cut him off sharply, her eyes piercing. David was good enough to share the recording with me. I heard exactly what happened. The room fell into stunned silence. My grandmother turned to Mark, her gaze unwavering. You struck a child. A 6-year-old, for singing. Then you insulted both her and her mother. Your behavior was inexcusable. Mark's face flushed an angry red. It wasn't that hard a slap. Everyone's overreacting. Be quiet, grandmother snapped, her voice cutting through his protest. When a grown man hits a child, the force is irrelevant. It's the breach of trust, the abuse of power. She then turned to my parents, her eyes holding both sorrow and accusation. And you two encouraged it, laughed at it, dismissed it. My mother's composure finally cracked. Doris, you don't understand. Sarah has always been difficult, always exaggerating. Carol, my grandmother interrupted, her voice resonating with a lifetime of experience. I raised your husband. I know exactly where Mark learned this behavior. Her gaze shifted to my father, whose face had gone pale, his bravado finally crumbling. Richard was disciplined harshly by his father. Too harshly. I regret every day that I didn't stop it. I won't make that mistake again." A heavy silence fell over the room, thick with unspoken history. My father stared at his hands, unable to meet her gaze. "Sarah," my grandmother continued, her voice softening slightly as she turned to me. "You did what I should have done decades ago. You protected your child, even at great personal cost. For that, you have my respect." I hadn't expected this alliance, this profound validation, and found myself momentarily speechless, tears stinging my eyes. "That said," she continued, her gaze sweeping over the family, "this family now stands at a crossroads. Healing is possible, but only with accountability." Mark pushed away from the mantelpiece, his voice bitter. "Accountability? I've been publicly humiliated, demoted at work, kicked off the charity board I helped build. Isn't that enough punishment for one slap?" I found my voice at last, stepping forward. "This isn't about punishment, Mark. It's about acknowledging what you did and its impact. Chloe has nightmares." She stopped singing, the thing that brought her joy. She asked me if she was bad. My voice broke, thick with the raw emotion I'd suppressed for so long. A 6-year-old child thought she deserved to be hit because the adults she trusted made her believe she was wrong for using her voice. "I didn't mean," Mark began, then stopped, seeming genuinely at a loss. "That's just it," I continued, my voice steadying. "You didn't mean to traumatize her. You just meant to control her, to make her small and quiet the way this family has always tried to control and diminish me. But intentions don't erase impact." My father stood abruptly, his face flushed with renewed anger. "This is ridiculous. We've indulged this drama long enough. Mark made a mistake, yes, but Sarah deliberately destroyed his reputation out of spite." "No, Richard," my grandmother said firmly, her gaze holding his. "Sarah showed people who Mark really is. He destroyed his own reputation through his actions." "I can't believe you're taking her side," my mother exclaimed, her voice shrill with disbelief. "I'm taking the side of that child," grandmother replied, her voice ringing with moral authority, "as should you all." The confrontation escalated from there. Years of resentment, unspoken hurts, and simmering dysfunction poured out as family members finally spoke their truths. Aunt Catherine described witnessing my father's harsh discipline of me as a child, while Mark received only gentle guidance. Cousin Jennifer revealed that Mark had once twisted her son's arm at a previous reunion for talking back. Uncle Tom admitted he'd seen Mark shove a business associate during a golf game, but said nothing because that's just how men handle disagreements. A damning pattern emerged, one of Mark's unchecked aggression and my parents' consistent enabling of his behavior. With each revelation, Mark's face grew darker, while my parents' denials became less and less convincing. Rachel finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady, cutting through the rising din. "I'm filing for separation." The room fell silent again, the air thick with shock. "What?" Mark turned to her, genuinely stunned. "This incident forced me to acknowledge things I've been ignoring for years," she continued, her eyes fixed on him. "The way you speak to me when you're angry, the things you throw, the fear I feel when I hear your car in the driveway after you've been drinking. I've never hit you." Mark protested, desperation in his voice. "No," she agreed, her voice still quiet but firm. "But hearing how you spoke to Chloe and Sarah, seeing how your parents minimized it, I suddenly understood where our relationship was heading." My mother made a last, desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Rachel, every marriage has rough patches. You can't throw away years together over one regrettable incident." "It's not one incident, Carol," Rachel replied, looking directly at my mother, her gaze clear. "It's a pattern, and I won't wait until it escalates further." The meeting continued for nearly 3 hours. By the end, several things had become undeniably clear. The family would never be the same. Lines had been drawn, not based on blood, but on values. Mark had lost far more than a professional title. He had lost the unwavering support system that had protected him from consequences his entire life. My parents faced a stark choice: acknowledge their role in enabling toxic behavior or risk losing relationships with multiple family members, including their only granddaughter. As the gathering broke up, My grandmother Doris took my hand. "It will take time," she said softly, her eyes filled with a weary wisdom. "Change doesn't happen overnight, especially in families with such entrenched patterns. But it started, and that's something." In the weeks that followed, the consequences continued to unfold. Mark's company issued a public statement about their commitment to family values and ethical conduct, implicitly distancing themselves from him without naming him directly. He was required to attend anger management therapy as a condition of continued employment. Rachel moved out of their home and filed official separation papers, the first step toward divorce. In a coffee meeting that left us both in tears, she confided that she had miscarried twice during their marriage and now wondered if the constant stress of walking on eggshells around Mark's temper had contributed. My parents made halting, awkward attempts at reconciliation, clearly motivated more by damage control than genuine remorse. My mother called with an invitation to dinner that included no acknowledgement of what had happened. My father sent an email that characterized the whole situation as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. I maintained firm boundaries, making it clear that any relationship moving forward would require explicit acknowledgement of the harm done to Chloe and concrete steps to ensure her safety and emotional well-being in their presence. The most profound changes, however, happened within me. The woman who had once accepted mistreatment as her due now stood firmly in her power, her voice strong and clear. The mother who had reluctantly brought her child into a toxic environment in hopes of family connection now recognized that true family is defined by love and respect, not merely blood and obligation. 6 months after the incident, I sat in Dr. Reed's office for a progress update on Chloe's therapy. "She's doing remarkably well," the psychologist shared, her smile genuine. "Children are resilient, especially when they have a secure attachment to a protective caregiver." "You've done everything right, Sarah." "I didn't protect her from the initial trauma," I pointed out, the familiar guilt surfacing. "But you responded perfectly afterward," Dr. Reed countered, her gaze unwavering. "You validated her feelings, removed her from danger, got her appropriate support, and held the perpetrator accountable. That's why she's healing." As I drove home, I reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from this painful chapter. A stronger, more confident voice. Healthier, impenetrable boundaries. The profound knowledge that I could protect my daughter, even against powerful opposition. And perhaps most surprisingly, authentic connections with family members who shared my values rather than simply my DNA. The path forward remained complicated. Healing would take time for all involved. But for the first time in my life, I was walking that path on my own terms, with my head held high and my daughter's hand firmly in mine. 6 months after Mark slapped Chloe at the lake house, our lives had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Our small apartment, once a symbol of my post-divorce financial struggles, had become a true sanctuary, filled with laughter, music, and most importantly, safety. Chloe's recovery continued to amaze me. Dr. Reed had reduced our sessions to monthly check-ins, noting that Chloe's resilience was remarkable. "She's singing again," I shared during our last appointment, emotion tightening my throat. Not just at home, but she joined the children's choir at the community center. "That's significant progress," the doctor smiled, her eyes warm. "It means she no longer associates her voice with punishment or shame." The incident had created ripples that extended far beyond our immediate family. Mark had been required to complete anger management therapy as a condition of his continued employment. Though his career trajectory had been permanently altered, the once golden child now occupied a back-office position with little client contact. His marriage had not survived the scrutiny that followed his actions. Rachel filed for divorce 3 months after their separation, citing irreconcilable differences publicly, but sharing with me privately that the incident with Chloe had forced her to acknowledge the emotional abuse she had normalized in their relationship. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if we'd had children," she confided during one of our now regular lunch meetings. "Would I have recognized it then? Or would I have enabled him the way your parents did?" My relationship with my parents remained complicated, fraught with tension. After multiple attempts at rug sweeping failed, They had grudgingly agreed to family counseling. Our first session had been tense, with my father attempting to control the narrative and my mother alternating between tears and passive-aggressive comments about family loyalty. Reconciliation requires accountability, the family therapist had stated firmly, her gaze piercing. And accountability begins with acknowledging harm. It took 3 sessions before my father admitted, with visible difficulty, I should have stopped Mark instead of encouraging him. What he did to Chloe was wrong. My mother took longer, struggling to relinquish her deeply ingrained role as family peacekeeper and enabler. I just wanted everyone to get along, she explained tearfully in our 5th session. I've always smoothed things over. That's what mothers do. No, I countered gently, my voice steady. Mothers protect their children, even when it's difficult, even when it disrupts the peace. Progress with my parents was measured in agonizingly small steps. They had not yet earned the right to unsupervised time with Chloe, but we had established a schedule of brief, structured visits that took place in neutral locations. During these meetings, I observed subtle changes, my father making halting efforts to engage with Chloe on her terms rather than imposing his expectations, my mother catching herself before making critical comments. The family division that emerged after the confrontation at my grandmother's house had initially been painful, a wrenching tear, but ultimately it proved profoundly healing. Relatives who had witnessed generations of toxic behavior finally spoke their truths, creating authentic connections based on shared values rather than obligatory blood ties. My grandmother Doris, at 87, had become an unexpected ally and advocate, her wisdom a beacon. I made mistakes with your father, she acknowledged during one of our weekly tea visits. I saw the signs, but told myself that's just how men were in those days. By the time I recognized the damage, the patterns were set. Her candor helped me understand the generational nature of our family dysfunction without excusing it. More importantly, it strengthened my resolve to ensure these patterns ended with me. My career had taken a surprising, exhilarating turn as well. The newfound confidence I found in standing up for Chloe translated directly to my professional life. When a project management position opened at Madison Marketing, I applied despite believing it was beyond my qualifications. To my shock, I got the job. Your handling of the crisis with your daughter showed exceptional leadership qualities, Samantha explained during my promotion interview. You were strategic, maintained clear communication under pressure, and demonstrated remarkable integrity. Those are exactly the skills we need in this role. The increased salary meant we no longer needed financial assistance from my parents, removing the last lever of control they had held over my life. Perhaps the most unexpected development came through a support group I joined for parents navigating family trauma. Sharing my experience led others to disclose similar stories, creating a vibrant community of mutual support and understanding. With encouragement from the group facilitator, I even began speaking at local parenting workshops about recognizing and addressing family toxicity. Your story resonates, the facilitator explained, because it's about more than one incident. It's about breaking generational patterns and choosing your child's well-being over family expectations. That's something many people struggle with. One crisp autumn morning, exactly 7 months after the lake house incident, we held a small gathering at our apartment. What Chloe called our chosen family celebration. Emily was there, along with David and his children. He and Susan had separated, another casualty of the family reckoning. Rachel came with her sister. A few colleagues from work joined us, as did several members of our support group. Most surprisingly, my grandmother Doris arrived with a hesitant-looking Carol in tow. My mother had asked to come, her first independent overture since everything happened. As everyone mingled in our modest living room, Chloe tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, can I sing the song now?" she whispered, her eyes wide with a familiar eagerness. "Are you sure you want to?" I asked, knowing what this meant to her. She nodded determinedly. "I've been practicing with Miss Joanna in choir." I called for everyone's attention as Chloe took her position by the window, sunlight illuminating her face. The room fell silent as she began to sing. Not the cartoon theme song that had triggered Mark's violence, but a simple children's ballad about courage and finding your voice. Her clear, sweet voice filled our home, without apology or fear. Watching her standing tall, her eyes bright with confidence, I felt tears spring to my eyes. This was the true measure of our healing. Not just surviving trauma, but reclaiming joy on the other side. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, a wave of warmth and love washing over her. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "She has a beautiful voice," Carol said quietly, her voice thick with regret. I should have said something that day. "Yes, you should have," I agreed, meeting her gaze steadily. "But what matters now is what we all say and do going forward." That evening, after our guests had departed and Chloe was tucked into bed, I sat on our small balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The past 7 months had been the most challenging and transformative of my life. I had lost certain family connections, but gained authentic ones. I had faced financial uncertainty, but found professional growth and independence. Most importantly, I had shown Chloe that she was worth protecting at any cost. The journey wasn't over. There would be more difficult conversations, more boundaries to establish and maintain, more work to do in therapy for both of us. But for the first time in my life, I faced the future without the shadow of family toxicity darkening my path. Mark's slap had been meant to silence a child. Instead, it had given voice to generations of suppressed truths. In trying to make Chloe small, he had inadvertently helped me discover just how strong I could be. As mothers, we cannot always prevent our children from experiencing pain, but we can show them how to respond to it with dignity and courage. We can demonstrate that true strength lies not in dominating others, but in standing firmly in our own truth, even when we stand alone. My brother slapped my daughter for being too loud. My parents laughed. And in that terrible moment, they taught me the most valuable lesson of my life, that some family ties need to be severed for healing to begin, while others can be rewoven into something stronger and more beautiful than before. Have you ever had to choose between entrenched family expectations and protecting someone vulnerable, someone you love fiercely? What would your next move have been if this happened to you? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. I'm reading everything. And remember that you deserve to be heard, to take up space, and to use your voice without shame, just like Chloe finally learned to do. Thank you for listening to our journey.